All right, so we're always digging into these articles, and you sent over a really interesting batch this time, all about what's going on with the MCU.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fascinating moment in time for Marvel. They've had such a long run of success.
I mean, yeah, think back to Endgame a few years ago. That was a phenomenon. I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
even topped Avatar at the global box office for a while.
Right.
But looking at these sources, though, and especially focusing on what's happening in the South Korean market,
Yeah.
you start to see some different trends emerging.
Absolutely. And a great example is Captain America Brave New World, which is the fourth Captain America film with Sam Wilson, right?
Right.
Now, in South Korea, earlier this year, it pulled in around 1.65 million viewers, which
Mhm.
on its own sounds like a decent number. But
Yeah.
when you compare that to a film like The Swordsman Nun, which is, kind of a niche a cult film, and they're
Yeah.
both in a similar range,
All right.
that raises some questions for a major superhero release, to not be blowing those smaller genre films out of the water.
Exactly. And it's even more striking when you look at some of the other films that came out around the same time as South Korea, early 2025.
Right.
Things like Mickey 17 and Hitman 2 and Harbin all did significantly better than Captain America 4.
Yeah, you're right. And it's not like this was just a one-off thing either.
Right.
It seems like a trend is developing because we've seen other recent MCU movies struggling to reach those same levels of popularity that they used to have. I
Yeah.
mean, the Marvels and Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania commercially, they did okay, but
Right.
not the same kind of cultural impact or buzz as the earlier films in those series.
Right.
And even Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 3, which I think most people agree was a good film and did pretty well at the box office.
Yeah.
It was also very clearly the end of that particular storyline, so it's not like it really signals a turnaround or a change in momentum for the whole MCU.
Makes you wonder if what's happening in South Korea is a sign of something bigger, you know?
Oh, for sure.
Maybe a global shift in how people are feeling about these big blockbuster franchises.
Right. And one of the articles you shared quotes film critic Kim Yoo-jung, who talks about how South Korean audiences are increasingly interested in genre films and more niche movies.
Yeah.
And, South Korea is often a trendsetter in cinema. So
Absolutely.
it makes you think, is this a taste of what's to come for blockbuster appeal worldwide? Is the appetite for these huge superhero stories maybe starting to change?
Okay, so if that appetite is changing, what's behind it?
Hmm.
Why isn't the MCU resonating the same way anymore, at least with some audiences?
Well, there are a couple of big ideas that came up in the research you shared.
Yeah.
One of the biggest factors that kept coming up was this idea of an increased barrier to entry. With the whole multiverse saga playing out across multiple phases of films
Right.
and these Disney Plus shows being so closely tied to the movies.
Like WandaVision feeding directly into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
It's almost like you need to have done your homework to fully understand what's going on in the latest movie.
It's true. I mean, it's like missing a crucial season of a TV show, right?
Right.
You wouldn't just jump into the latest season without catching up.
And if you're a casual moviegoer who just wants to enjoy a fun superhero flick,
Right.
that level of interconnectedness can be a real turnoff.
Yeah, I can see that.
So what was initially seen as a strength, this huge interconnected universe of stories,
Yeah.
it might actually be leading to fatigue or even excluding some viewers.
Right, because people might be thinking, do I really need to watch 3 different shows just
Mm.
to understand what's happening in this 2-hour movie?
Exactly.
And of course, on top of that, we have to factor in how much the pandemic has changed the whole landscape of entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. There's no getting around that.
The way we consume content, we're willing to pay for.
Right. Everyone got so used to streaming at home, and now with ticket prices going up,
Right.
going to the cinema feels like a much bigger decision.
Yeah.
People are being much more selective. They want to make sure they're going to see something truly spectacular or something that has amazing reviews and everyone's talking about.
Right.
So that kind of synergy between the MCU movies and the Disney Plus shows,
Right.
it's not working as well as it used to.
Right, because why rush out to the theater when you could just wait for it to come to streaming?
Exactly. And you know what else is interesting?
What's that?
One of the articles you sent pointed out that there's been this resurgence of interest in independent films and art house movies,
Oh, yeah.
and even re-releases of classic films in theaters.
That's true.
So it seems like maybe some people are actively looking for something different, beyond the typical blockbuster formula.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
I mean, the entertainment landscape is so diverse now,
It is.
and audience tastes are changing, so it's not as simple as just assuming that everyone wants to see the next big superhero movie.
So the big question for all of us listening is, what is Marvel doing about all this? What are they trying to do to adapt to this new landscape?
Well, there's some interesting clues in the research you sent.
Okay.
One thing that seems clear is that they're putting a renewed focus on those core comic book properties, really grounding things in those established characters and stories.
Okay.
And a good example of that is the new Disney Plus animated series, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man.
Right.
It's got this retro animation style, and it looks like the stories are going to be more self-contained, not as deeply tied to the larger MCU.
Yeah.
It feels like a deliberate throwback to those earlier MCU films,
Right.
when things were a bit simpler and more accessible.
Yeah. It's like they're trying to recapture some of that initial magic and appeal that drew so many people in.
Right. And the word is that the show has been getting really positive feedback internally.
Okay.
And there are already plans for new seasons every year. So it seems like Marvel sees this as an important part of their strategy going forward.
That makes sense. And then there's the Fantastic Four reboot.
Oh.
That's scheduled to come out in July 2025.
Right.
Now, the Fantastic Four have had a bit of a bumpy ride on the big screen,
Yeah.
Those previous films didn't quite connect with audiences the way some of the other Marvel movies did.
True.
But the Fantastic Four have this huge and dedicated fan base from the comics.
They do.
So it feels like Marvel is trying to tap into that existing love for those characters.
Yeah, to maybe try and get it right this time.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting because some of the casting rumors are pretty wild.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
So there's this talk of Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man himself,
Right.
possibly being cast as Dr. Doom,
Wow.
who, of course, is a classic Fantastic Four villain.
Yeah, one of the all-time greats.
And apparently, he'd be playing Doom in a future Avengers film, Avengers Doomsday, which is supposedly coming out in 2026.
That's pretty huge if it's true.
Right. And it really suggests that the Fantastic Four and those characters are going to be central to the future of the MCU.
Yeah, and on top of that, you've got the Russo brothers coming back.
Oh, yeah, the directors of Endgame.
Right.
They're supposedly going to be directing more Avengers films in 2026 and 2027.
And they've talked about wanting to get back to a more focused central narrative. Like they want to kind of reorganize the whole multiverse saga and bring things back down to earth a bit.
Right. So when you look at all these moves together, it seems like Marvel is trying to shift gears away from these increasingly complex and maybe alienating multiverse storylines.
Right.
And back towards more grounded, character-driven narratives that are closer to what people love about the comics.
Absolutely. And one of the sources even used the word restructuring, which I think is really fitting.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And
Yeah.
it seems like they're acknowledging that things haven't been working perfectly and they're trying to make some changes.
Right. And trying to reconnect with that core audience, either the people who have been there since the beginning.
Right. By giving them more of what they love, those familiar characters and storylines.
It's like they're sending a signal that they're listening to the fans and they're trying to course correct.
But even with these changes, there's still some big challenges ahead, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not going to be easy to win back those viewers who maybe have felt a little bit lost or overwhelmed by the MCU lately.
Right, and if people still feel like keeping up with all the different movies and shows feels like homework rather than fun, that's going to be a tough hurdle to overcome.
And then there's the question of what the multiverse has done to the characters themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have infinite versions of everyone running around,
right,
does it kind of dilute the impact of what happens to them?
Yeah, it can make things feel less meaningful.
Right. And then you also have the demographic shifts to consider. One of the articles mentioned that there was a significant drop in Gen Z viewership between Captain Marvel and the Marvels.
Oh, wow.
So attracting and keeping younger audiences is going to be crucial for the future of the franchise.
Right. And that raises another question, in this landscape with so many different entertainment options out there.
Right.
Who is the core MCU fan that Marvel is trying to win back?
Yeah. I mean, their tastes and their viewing habits might be totally different now than they were a few years ago.
Yeah.
And one of the sources also brought up a really interesting point about the challenge of building a global franchise on something that's so rooted in American comic book culture.
Oh, yeah, that's a trickier one.
Especially in the current global political climate.
Right. It's a complex issue that they'll need to handle carefully.
I mean, ultimately what we're seeing here is that audiences are demanding more.
Yeah.
They want something special, something that's really worth their time and money.
Right. Those days of just churning out a big budget superhero movie and expecting it to be a guaranteed hit.
Right.
Those days are over.
People are more discerning and they have more choices than ever before.
Exactly.
So let's sum all this up for you, the listener. Based on the sources you shared with us, it seems like the MCU's definitely at a crossroads right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Especially in key markets like South Korea, we're seeing signs that their dominance might be slipping a little.
Right.
And it seems like this is happening for a few different reasons. The stories have become super complex and maybe a bit too overwhelming.
Right.
People's viewing habits have changed thanks to streaming and the pandemic.
Yeah.
And maybe there's also a feeling that the characters themselves have gotten a little lost in the shuffle of the multiverse.
I think that's a good summary.
But it's not all doom and gloom because it seems like Marvel is starting to course correct.
Right.
They're putting a renewed focus on those core comic book properties.
Right. Rebooting franchises like the Fantastic Four, bringing back key creative figures like the Russo brothers.
Yeah, and trying to bring the stories back down to earth a bit.
It's like they're trying to remind everyone what made the MCU so special in the first place. You know, those great characters and those compelling storylines.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder in this crazy world of entertainment with so many different options vying for your attention.
Yeah.
What do you think is the key for the MCU to recapture that magic and stay relevant? Do they need to go back to simpler, more standalone stories?
Yeah.
Or do they need to double down on character development and emotional depth?
Right.
Or maybe it's something completely different, something we haven't even considered.
It's a tough challenge. You know, how do you balance honoring the legacy that so many people love while also adapting to the changing demands of the entertainment landscape?
Exactly. And how do you appeal to those diehard fans while also attracting a whole new generation of viewers?
It's a fascinating puzzle.
It really is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was a good one.
Until next time.
See ya.